everyone. Welcome to the Environmental Law Institute. My name is Chandra Middleton. I'm the director of the Associates program here, which means that I am in charge of membership and education outreach. If you wanted to learn a little bit more about what ELI does, please go to our website, www.eli.org. I'd like to welcome all of you to our summer school series, those of you in the audience and on the phone. We have about probably a good 25 people here and almost 100 on the phone who couldn't make it. So pretty much a full house. Summer school is a chance for environmental interns and other folks who are interested in environmental issues to learn a little bit more about the basic environmental legislation and policies of our country, and it's taught by experts. It's an informal brown bag series, and you can find more about the series on our website. And to kick off the 8-part series of summer school, I thought I'd hold a careers panel on environmental law and policy. So that's today's. The series and this particular seminar are co-sponsored by ELI's Associates program. So thank you to our members for helping us bring this to fruition. And by the DC Bar's Environment, Energy, and Natural Resources section. So now just really brief introductions, and then I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I have directly to my left Monty Cooper, who's an associate at Sedgwick. And then to his left, I have Stephanie Madden, who is Associate Legislative Counsel at Earth Justice. And then Daniel Schramm, who is the Attorney Advisor and Attorney Advisor in the US EPA's Office of General Counsel. And Joel Visser, who's an Associate at Sidley Austin. So I think with that, let's start with Joel. And if you wanted to just say a little bit about your experience and how you've come to be where you are.
Sure, I'm an attorney at Sidley Austin. I've been there for about a year and a half now. Sidley is a multinational firm. We have offices around the world. We have about 1,500 attorneys right now. We have about 30 attorneys who practice environmental law, about a third in DC, and we do a mix of litigation work, regulatory work, and other compliance work for our clients there. Before coming to Sidley, I worked for a year clerking in Detroit for a federal district court judge. I also earned a degree in environmental policy, master's degree at Michigan before I came out here, so I'll happy to answer questions about that as well.
And yeah, I'm an attorney advisor at EPA, one of many. I'm in the Office of General Counsel, and I'll be happy to talk more about that, but that's one of kind of two major repositories of lawyers in the agency, the other being the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. I came there actually from, I've been there about 2 years, came there from actually working here at ELI, first as a law fellow, and as a staff attorney for 1 year. And before that, I went to Vermont Law School for my JD.
Hi, again, Stephanie Madden. I work just up the street for Earth Justice. In case folks aren't familiar with us, we're the largest nonprofit environmental law firm in the country. We're actually going into our 41st year this year, and we have represented over 1,000 groups, from large nonprofits like the Sierra Club all the way down to very small community groups free of charge. I am situated in our policy and legislation team, so though most of our organization's focus is on suing, I'm essentially a lobbyist protecting our litigation from intervention in Congress, and at times working with the agency on different rulemakings that we're litigating. So, you know, I went to law school, I clerked for a judge as a judicial intern, and realized I didn't want to be a litigator, but I knew I always wanted to work in politics, and my master's is in urban affairs and public policy, and it's a planning concentration. I thought perhaps at one point I wanted to be a planner, and that's how I got into environmental issues. It wasn't something I initially had thought about. I was coming from affordable housing. So after law school, I was a Congressional Black Caucus Fellow for Congressman Keith Ellison of Minneapolis, and I actually heard about Earth Justice being lobbied by someone that's my now coworker and colleague around pesticides, and that's how I got to where I am today. So I would love to take questions from folks about maybe Hill as well as Earth Justice.
Great. I'm Monty Cooper, and I'm with Sedgwick LLP in the DC office. We're based out in San Francisco. My practice is in commercial litigation with an emphasis on environmental and toxic torts litigation and products liability matters as well. We've done, and I've done some environmental litigation, environmental regulatory work, clean air issues, new source review in particular. But I'm a litigator by my training, and so it was, and I think it's a good mix of people on the panel here that if you're interested in litigation and you want to get into that area, you can work with environmental issues. At the same time, if you don't like litigation, there are a lot of other things you can do as well in environmental law. So before I started practicing, I clerked for a federal judge in South Carolina for a year, and went to William & Mary for law school, and Georgetown as an undergrad in D.C. So that's my background. Looking forward to talking with you about careers in environmental law.
Okay, with that, do we have any questions to start off? All right, I'll be the first to ask, break the ice. Although I guess, do panelists have any questions for each other? Would that be a place to start? Okay. Okay, so Stephanie, you mentioned that you had gotten into environmental law from kind of a different area of law. I guess I'm curious to know how other panelists kind of found their way to environmental law or policy or litigation, and what was was it something you always wanted to do or something you came to a little bit later? And I guess we'll start with Joel.
Sure. Well, the environmental aspect was always there for me. I started off, grew up in northern Michigan. My dad worked for the state wildlife agency there, so always wanted to do environmental issues and couldn't figure out quite how to do it. I studied chemistry, studied environmental ethics in a master's program, and found them to be less practical than I was hoping for. And law seemed to be a way to get my environmental interests in sort of a practical way where I could see results on a day-to-day basis, at least in the small matters, not the big picture stuff. But at least you finish the day or the month, whatever, and you see results. So that's why I came to practice law.
Okay.
Results. Yeah, that's. We hope we get to results in the agency. For me, environment was always a key factor. When I went to law school, my attitude was, I want to be an environmental, someone working in the environmental field first, and a lawyer second. And that's one reason why Vermont appealed to me, because it has such a strong emphasis in environmental policy in addition to being a law school. But I went to St. Olaf College in Minnesota, so I grew up in St. Louis, also from the Midwest. I think for me, environmental issues were very early on something I was very interested in. I often tell people, growing up in the suburbs in St. Louis, just kind of seeing sprawl firsthand, and I know a lot, all of us have that experience, and thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this, So that was kind of how I really got interested, and then in college took some classes. Always was less of a science person and more of a humanities person. I majored in philosophy, and wish now looking back, sort of wish I had more science background. I have some, and certainly enough to be versatile in the work we do. But of course, with the competitive job market, obviously, having that science background can be a leg up. But law seemed like a good fit for me because I was more interested in history, politics, ethics, all of these kinds of things, which is what a lot of law is about. So that's how I ended up at EPA.
I guess I can just add a little bit. Sure. I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was 7, so that never changed. It's just the type of lawyer kept changing. So initially I wanted to be a civil rights attorney from watching the documentaries like Eyes on the Prize and everything like that, because I always thought of lawyers as people that help people. That was a positive introduction to what attorneys do. So when I went to law school, I went to Howard Law School here in DC. I definitely was thinking about coming out of my master's program, how housing affordability really, is a critical issue, and especially in a place like DC. And then I started to realize, housing and real estate matters essentially often, and land use matters fall under the environmental practice group at a lot of organizations. So I was like, I definitely want to start taking more courses related to environmental law and related issues. And then I started thinking about housing affordability through an environmental lens, not or your rent. It's also how expensive it is to operate your home and heat it and things like around efficiency. So I started thinking about environmental matters as it related to housing, and that got me deeper into just things like clean water and clean air. And coming from Virginia Beach, everything's about the Chesapeake Bay. Everything. I mean, you take oceanography in high school, I thought everyone did. I didn't realize that wasn't just a normal class. So, that just is part of our life, is always thinking about things like that. But I now work on clean air issues for Earth Justice, and I start to realize, wow, there are so many people suffering with asthma and things I never really thought about, but you see things in a different lens when you're working on, certain types of pollution. So I definitely think that I probably was always caring about environmental matters, but maybe not in the very deliberate way that some of you, were raised to think about things. So I think that just bringing a different angle to how you look at it is important for what I do, because if I'm trying to influence members of Congress, I have to also influence their staff who might not be environmentalists to demonstrate that their constituents do care about it, because you can't find me a parent who doesn't want their child to have clean water or clean air. It's not really partisan. I can't think of a parent who doesn't. So, yeah, housing affordability got me to environmental stuff.
Yeah, I sort of fell into it. I wanted to be a litigator primarily, and after I clerked, I went to a firm, did a variety of things. Sort of got drawn in with partners that were working on environmental toxic torts matters, and I found it really interesting. And the cases were complex, they were large, and they would sometimes go to trial. Not all the times, but sometimes, which at least leading up to trial was always interesting. And if you like litigation, you certainly want to get up to that point, maybe even try the case. But and one thing I found about environmental law too, and I assume there are other subject matters like this, but I think the places like ELI and others that are really active and sort of forward thinking and thinking about environmental policy. And I found it to be a way to develop a subject matter expertise, or at least attempt at subject matter expertise. So I've had a chance to write a little bit and really think about some of the broader policy implications of what the law, how it affected policy, is probably a better way to say it. And so that's sort of how I fell into it. And I've enjoyed it, and enjoyed working with the folks here at ELI too. I think they've been great.
Okay. We have a question from online. I'm a recent international relations graduate with an interest in pursuing a career in law. I have no prior experience with the environmental area. However, I share a genuine interest in the field and wish to gain more exposure to the area before applying to law school. How important is a background in environmental area prior to entering law school? And given the number of unemployed JDs leaving law school, how in demand is the environmental field relative to other fields? Dan, do you want to take that one?
Okay. My off-the-cuff reaction is, how much experience do you need in environmental work before going to law school and focusing on environmental? Surprisingly less than you might think. I think that law is a particular profession that has that you can practice, and you can do environmental work, or you can do other subject matter work as a lawyer, and certainly law schools are specializing now more and more. But you can certainly go into law school and build. When I started at Vermont, I didn't have a particularly extensive background in environmental work. I did some stuff when I was in college. I was very interested in it, but when I went to Vermont, I sort of hit the ground running there and tried to jump into the Environmental Law Society, some campus greening initiatives, things like that, some community work, and so I was always looking for a balance in law school between the being dedicated to my studies and learning the law and learning how to be a good lawyer, as well as trying to expand my understanding of environmental issues, the science and policy, and the community aspects. So, and that to me was a really fruitful combination as I went through law school, and I kind of had a negative reaction to the approach to law school, which says you got to hunker down and in the law library and do that kind of thing. So that's my own take. Maybe others have different thoughts.
Yeah, you should probably, certainly given today's market, do as much as you can in whatever field you're interested in. I think 10 years ago, I thought about the question, and if I had been sitting where you guys are, someone probably would have said, well, it probably doesn't matter quite as much. Obviously go to law school and do well. I mean, that's the most important thing, and then you come out and you can kind of find a place. But now the job market is really competitive. I mean, for JDs coming out, and it's extremely competitive, and so if you can get involved in as many different environmental issues and work with as many environmental organizations as you can, you should probably do that. I talk a lot and tell folks a lot about the benefits I've found from writing about issues, and there are a number of publications out there that are looking for young people to write about whatever topic is out there. And having published sort of articles on your resume, certainly in law school, before it even, I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I think it adds something to your resume there. So, yeah, getting involved in as many different things as you can before law school is a good thing, I think.
I guess I just wanted to add that one of the great things, I know we have an intern from Sierra Club here, I think. I mean, they're everywhere, and at the grassroots level, I mean, I dare say there's probably not a college that's not situated near a local chapter one could join, and in addition, they often have campus-based organizing, so that could be a great way just to kind of learn not only about environmental issues, but ones that are right in your backyard. And also, I didn't do a lot of things specific to environmental work in undergrad. I guess through graduate school, some of the planning-related stuff definitely had environmental overtones, but you definitely have to take certain environmental coursework in law school if you want to make that transition. And I think that people, in addition to that, should definitely explore clinics if there are environmental clinics at the law school. If anything, you might even want to look to see if there are law schools that offer that first before you try to apply to them. Because I think sometimes, I just kind of lucked out that I came to Howard as they were developing a clinic, because I didn't know beforehand that I was going to be going that route, but I definitely took advantage of it when it was presented. So that's all I wanted to add.
I'd agree that looking at some law schools have different focuses, and find one, Vermont is a great example, and others that you have a strong focus on environmental law, and you'll find more classes, more opportunities to develop that expertise. So, again, the best law school you can is always a great option, but look among peer schools to say which one is going to be better for environmental law.
Haley.
So I know, is this thing on? Yeah, we're good. So at least a couple of you have a JD and in addition have a master's degree. So I'm also a recent college graduate, and looking and applying to programs, looking at dual degree programs and joint degree programs, how helpful is it, again, given today's competitive job market, to have a JD MPP, JD MPA, or like an MA or an MS and a JD? It seems like this is kind of a growing trend, but it does require more money, more time in school, and I'm wondering kind of what's the cost-benefit analysis in your guys' opinion?
I guess I'll answer it. That's a great question. I'm a JD MPP. And maybe offline we can do a cost-benefit analysis. I think overall, I think it's a good thing. I enjoyed I did the MPP, so Master of Public Policy. This was a 4-year program. First year I did policy, and the next 3 years I did law school with a policy class intermixing. It was a great, I say, it was a nice way of thinking differently in my policy classes. I can't necessarily say that I've used my policy degree as a litigator. That said, I never intended for that to be, that wasn't the idea to begin with. That said, I suppose if I really were interested in environmental regulation and environmental regulatory work, and did an MPP and focused it on maybe economics, focused it on something dealing with the environment, whatever the program is, I think that can be a benefit. And so I think the benefits would outweigh the costs there. But I'd encourage it.
I had a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Were there other responses?
Yeah, sure. I did the joint degree as well, and I think that there is certainly a cost to the extra year of school, and I would also agree that in day-to-day litigation practice, I don't use it a whole lot, but on the regulatory work that I do, I think it's very helpful to have a broader perspective. You're making, legal arguments, but also a lot of policy-based arguments in support of your clients, and to have that broader perspective to be able to do that readily is helpful. And I think also just, to differentiate yourself on a resume, to say, I've got this other degree, it's going to help you sell yourself to an employer, is going to help your employer sell you to clients as well. Say, this person has great exposure and experience. So I think from a marketing standpoint for yourself and otherwise, it's a great tool.
And just to add to that, I remember doing an interview once, applying to jobs, and that was the one thing that the interviewer talked about, was public policy background. We had a long discussion about my background in that, so there are benefits. So.
I just want to say I didn't do a joint program. I really did spend 2 years at one school and then law school after that. So I was in college for 1999 and 2009, minus a year of Americorps. But I definitely think that because I always knew I wanted to somehow work in a legislative capacity, and most people in the Hill, they are JDs, so it definitely helps to say that you have all this additional writing experience and additional policy experience. And thankfully, I didn't have to pay for my master's because the program was so well funded. I met maybe one person that paid to go, but because it was at University of Delaware, a very small state, you could really, I wrote a white paper that led to a law because the state is so small that those opportunities are actually available. So I definitely encourage you to look at the Urban Affairs program at the University of Delaware. It's a great program, but you also can have some real world impacts through that. And I definitely think that it made a difference not only in the competition to get on the Hill, but also to work in an advocacy lobby capacity with an environmental firm. It was necessary to have that policy background in addition to the law degree, because most of our lobbyists are attorneys. There might be two that
Hi, I was just wondering how you all consciously chose, I guess, to work where you do, whether it is, at a federal agency or at a law firm, and what are the benefits and challenges you find at your job?
Government. So after 2 years at ELI, great experience here. I guess I always kind of viewed it as a stepping stone to the law fellowship program here is very good. For those of you finishing law school, worth looking into, and it's a good, what happens here is a lot of interesting policy research that I really enjoy doing. We worked on energy subsidies, worked on climate change adaptation policies, how we respond to climate change, and a number of other really interesting projects. I really enjoyed that. It definitely sort of filled in that policy gap that I didn't quite have in law school. It was an amazing experience to work at sort of more at the intersection of science and policy, perhaps than I do now in my day-to-day. But I knew that I wanted to be more of a lawyer. I wanted to practice law. I didn't just want to write about it. And so, I started looking for work. And of course, this is a couple years ago when things were not so hot. The government was, and maybe still aren't so hot, but I guess I'll confess I've never been really interested in private practice. I wanted to do either non-governmental work or government work, and this was an opportunity that came along. I'd say one thing to always be, especially in this job market, is flexibility in what you're willing to accept. It's funny because when I was interviewing with EPA, they said we have, we're hiring for 3 positions. We've got air, water, and waste. What do you want to do? I said, maybe air or water. And of course, I ended up in the waste office. So, and in fact, my office the acronym is SWIRLO, which I think it's just great. It's a Solid Waste and Emergency Response Law Office, which is, I think, that's got to be like in the top 3. But the EPA is filled with acronyms, and there's OXPP and there's oh wow, but I think SWIRLO is pretty good. So anyway, that when they said, how about waste? Okay, sure. And I actually, hadn't done, that means RCRA, resource Conservation Recovery Act practice, which is primarily hazardous waste regulation at the federal level, and Superfund, and with that, brownfields work. And our office also happens to handle Oil Pollution Act cases. If you look at the statutes, Oil Pollution Act and CERCLA Superfund have a lot in common. So our office, within the Office of General Counsel, handles both of those practice areas. And so I was just telling Joel before we started, it's interesting how, didn't think that was necessarily where I was going to go as an attorney. It turns out that that's presented some amazing opportunities to work on things that I didn't think I would be working on. So I think flexibility and looking for opportunity is a big part of it. And I also, on the government aspect, I really, it's actually fascinating work to be sort of inside the government, and I think it's a really valuable experience to have. If you can get any of that as an intern or otherwise, I think it will really help kind of shape how you think about the practice outside of it. And I'm sure that's true of every other place, but I would put that plug in for government too.
Hi. So I had a question. I'm an environmental law student right now, but I haven't taken environmental law. I just finished my first year. But my work this summer is actually, I wish I would have taken environmental law. And so I was hoping maybe you guys could address a little bit of the substance, not too much, it doesn't have to be too in-depth, but kind of the substance of environmental law and any kind of pointers for someone who's just starting out from the inside.
So the question was, sorry, I'm going to start repeating the questions for those on the phone. The question was whether you could offer any pointers for somebody who's just starting out, and maybe give, I guess, a brief overview of the major domestic legislation. So I'll actually do that and make a plug for the rest of the seminar series, because what we'll do is we'll break it up according to statute. So very briefly, there's the National Environmental Policy Act. NEPA.
Never mind, there's a lot of things going in Congress to get that.
Right, I know. So there's NEPA, which is sort of the underpinning procedural statute for domestic environmental law. And then there's Endangered Species Act, and there's Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Recreational Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, CERCLA, which I'm not even going to try to remember from school. And then there's also some oceans legislation as well. And so instead of having folks go into those, I'm just going to leave it for the rest of the sessions, and hopefully it'll come back.
I guess I meant more like tips for navigating. Like I've already been doing some of that substantive work, and it's like more I don't know, like research tips or I mean maybe it is too substantive. But
Are you wondering sort of how to choose, or?
no, like okay, never mind. Just if you guys had actual pointers for like environmental research.
Okay.
There are great treatises, handbooks out there. It's always a good place to start. You can get the 1 or 2 page summary of, whether it's New Source Review and Clean Air Act or these complex, difficult subjects. You can at least get your feet wet, get the acronyms figured out. Someone around will usually have one. You can find one, or the library will have them. And even online, you can find those kind of summaries. But that's a great place to start. Don't go to the law right away. Find someone who can explain it to you first before you try to get the details figured out.
And ELI summer camp, the boot camp thing is fantastic. If you ever get a chance to go to it, and they'll give little treatises on environmental law. I was just thinking too, it's the ABA's environment section. If you ever get a chance to go to the sections, I won't even say retreat, but it's the annual program that they do. I know they'll give great little, just small treatises on various aspects of the law. The other thing, and it may be a constant refrain, Dave, if you can think of an area you're really interested in, I'd say just dive into it and sort of write about it. Think of an issue or an argument you'd like to make. coming up, I don't know whatever the legal journals you have in law school, but when you write your note for whatever the journal you're writing, write on an environmental law topic, and just being in the area and having to really think about writing about something, you'll begin to connect dots, at least in that universe of environmental law, and then you can kind of expand upon it. It's incredibly complex to kind of get your mind around, but it's sort of like you can't eat the whole thing. You have to eat it in parts, I guess.
If there's any like major paper requirement that you can make about the environment, I would do that, because I took international economic law, which is basically international trade, because it's my other side passion, because it's a different panel, different time. But I just found a way to talk about multilateral environmental agreements and how sometimes they might actually come up against trade agreements, and how maybe there could be a common article and like that. Really boring stuff. But I found a way to talk about something else I cared about, two things I cared about. That way, when I'm looking for jobs, I have a big piece of legal writing that's about two things I'm interested in. So it was like a twofer, so I could use it for trade stuff, or I could use it for the environment. And I was able to work for the Ways and Means Committee, Trade Subcommittee, because of stuff like that. So, I know most of us have more than one thing in that.
Well, and that raises the whole, I mean, do you specialize, or do you do you go like you want to cover all of them, you know, and when I was at Vermont, I, you know, had this conversation many times, and some people were like, you know, air is where it's at. I don't want to do air. I'm going to be an air lawyer, you know, that sort of thing. And then you can really develop an expertise. I think writing a note is a great way to do that. And then, you know, I think with the competitive market, there's definitely an argument for that strategy. You know, but it also depends on what kind of law you're going to end up in. If you're going to be a litigator, you know, you'd be looking at your moot court and debate and things like learning your rules of evidence and trial tactics and all that stuff, which, you know, in my day job, you know, we're basically in-house counsel. So what I do is like advise in almost very rarely am I working with people outside of the agency, and I'm just helping my clients avoid getting sued most of the time. So a lot of that happens in a way that's, which, are we very good at that or not? Different panel discussion, you know.
Goes
But
with the territory in your job, I think.
Yeah, well, nothing that I've worked on we haven't gotten sued yet. So, but it's only been a couple of years, so that's really not changed. But no, I think it's a, you know, in-house counsel is an interesting role. We're sort of the liaisons also with the Justice Department, but enforcement does a lot of that too. And if you all are interested, we can get more into details of what different lawyers within the government do, like what does Justice do versus an agency like EPA or Forest Service, versus what do our regions do, because our regional attorneys do. You know, if you wanted like, you know, more direct kind of litigation enforcement practice, working with the states on the state, you know, a lot of federal environmental law happens through the state programs that are authorized under the federal statutes. So, you know, you go to work for a state agency, you know, you're at this level. If you're at a regional office, you're here. If you're, you know, there's just sort of this level of abstraction that comes with, I think, being in a place like headquarters, which is, you know, we get to work on fairly high level stuff. But the trade-off is, I often feel like, boy, I wish I could know more about what's actually happening on the ground. And the trade-off is also, I wish I could see more results more immediately, and that's something that you kind of lose if you're at that like high level. Maybe that you can relate to that too. At a sort of national hill level, headquarters level kind of stuff. So it's something to keep in mind. I have our regional attorneys do amazing work, and sometimes I'm like, boy, I need to get myself on a detail so I can go work in a region and figure out how an enforcement action, you know, learn the mechanics of what actually happens on the ground. So.
Did you have a comment or next question? Okay. That actually gets to one of the questions that was emailed in, which is, how much do you get to interact with the people that you're representing, or those who are affected by the policies that you're working on? And how, I think the question kind of gets to, how do you get to see those results that you are maybe looking for, or hoping to find at the end of the day, or the
I think my group at least is pretty leanly staffed on projects, so I do get to do a lot of work, right off the bat, with clients more directly. I have one client I work with, a lot. In the first year, a couple of associates that I worked with moved on to other things, so I'm now the primary associate on that matter. So I work with the general counsel, once a week, a couple times a week. I'm probably on the phone with them. Other clients a little bit less so, but still typically you're talking to the client with some regularity right off the bat, given the way that these cases are structured. I think other areas of law and in private practice you get less of that. There's much more hierarchy within a firm, so I've enjoyed that a lot. And you get to know, on the policy side as well, it's not just knowing, here's a law, here's how I help my client win. It's really getting a better sense of what their business, what they really want to accomplish, and how you can understand that and make good arguments for them and see the bigger picture. So I've definitely had a chance to do that right off the bat, which has been a lot of fun.
Probably the most gratifying experience I've had since I've been with Earth Justice is that our clients depend on us so much, and oftentimes they're not situated anywhere near Washington D.C. So we actually partnered with the Hip Hop Caucus, the American Nurses Association, Physicians with Social Responsibility, and the National Council of Churches. What a great combo of people. And we brought impacted citizens from all 50 states and Puerto Rico for a big lobby event called 50 States United for Healthy Air. So you had nurses, doctors, people of faith, all types of people coming in to not only meet with their members of Congress, but also to meet with EPA, to meet with CEQ, and a lot of other stakeholders around how different regulations that were either pending or were being prepped for implementation needed to be adequately protected from any congressional intervention. And it was just great to see them explain the impacts of things that sometimes can become so abstract that you forget that there's someone who really needs to be protected from all the things that we're working on. And in many ways, they're much more compelling and persuasive explainers of their situation than the DC-based folks like myself. So I think that was a capstone of my time at Earth Justice. But on a regular basis, I'm on a million listservs for various sources of air pollution. So I'm gonna submit kiln listserv or on various power plants. And we do stay in touch via email, probably most readily, but we do have a lot of phone calls. And it's just kind of a great reminder of what you're doing, because sometimes you get sucked into the DC thing of it, whether it's from the litigation side or from the policy lobby side, and they remind you why you're doing what you're doing. And I really enjoy that aspect of my job, is having a good deal of client contact.
Just to add, the same. We can move on.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah. Actually, coming up on my last year of law school, I'm trying to figure out where I want to focus on work. Working with the U.S. Attorney's Office last summer, I kind of think that I really want to do litigation. So my question kind of is, I'm really interested in topics that really don't go to court, such as environmental justice. So I kind of want to know, for the litigation standpoint, like how much time do you actually spend preparing for litigation and actually going into court with the whole toxic torts or Stephanie, the things that you do? Oh, you don't. Oh, I'm sorry.
It depends on the cases. I mean, cases that we work on, we were involved in a 4-month trial in California last year, and so I didn't have to go out there, thank goodness. but I got plenty of 1 a.m. phone calls for different matters, and we're preparing for a trial in a couple states in the Northeast coming up in November. So in terms of time litigating cases, do it all the time, and that's sort of what I do. These cases, particularly the toxic torts matters, don't go to trial because they're tough cases, and certainly in front of juries across the country. But sometimes they do go. A lot of times too, clients, at least our clients in particular, would rather work with the other side on a variety of these matters. So, so sometimes they go to trial, oftentimes they don't. there's certainly opportunities to litigate. A lot of motions practice, so drafting of briefs back and forth. A lot of depositions taken, etc. So.
I'd agree with that. I think, litigation and trial work are somewhat different things. You can do a lot of work with motion practice with other aspects where you're not actually going to trial. You may be going to court yet to argue some of these things. From an EJ standpoint, I would think it may be a place where you want to look more into an NGO setting than a law firm where you have more freedom to bring your own lawsuits in that sense. If that's an area of passion, then you can take a more aggressive stance and push government to be more proactive. So you can find a group that's doing that, and you can do more litigation than you may otherwise see.
In EPA, the Office of Environmental Justice is actually in the enforcement office, and it's staffed with, I assume they probably have non-lawyers too, but I know that they definitely have a large legal staff. So, certainly in EPA, environmental justice is a huge issue, particularly as with Administrator Jackson. It's one of her priorities, and the agency's doing some good work there. But I think the Office of Environmental Justice, I think you're hitting the right point that there's not necessarily there are litigation aspects, but you might have to make that choice about.
And if I can just add too, if you really want trial experience, I'd make sure you keep your contacts at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think you said, stay in touch with those guys. I mean that the best trial lawyers are oftentimes coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in particular, certainly justice as well. And you come out and you go in private practice, you'll be like LeBron James. Those are skill sets that are valued.
We had another question here. Oh, we're back there first.
I was just wondering, for those of you that did have environmental interests before going to law school, there's a lot of different fields out there for people interested in the environment. So I'm wondering what brought you to that environmental law aspect of environmental issues. What attracted you to the law side of it too?
Well, I guess for me, it was really finding like you said, a place where I could kind of maybe dig in a little bit deeper and kind of deal with issues that were pressing at the time. I studied chemistry a little bit, doing some theoretical chemistry and some environmental ethics, both of which were a little bit more ivory tower-ish, I guess, the way that I was studying them. And I liked the work, but didn't see myself doing that long-term, that it was going to be rewarding in that sense. So to me, it was seeing other lawyers, other family members who practiced law and seeing what they did and saying, this would kind of get at what I feel like is missing in my current environmental pursuits, and would let me still do environmental law and see the environmental issues on a day-to-day basis. So it's really kind of finding it's the sort of the professional school aspect versus sort of a PhD program kind of thing, I guess. That's how I looked at it.
Can I ask, are you thinking about whether you should go to law school or like policy, or are you in law school?
I'm actually just got accepted, so I'm going to Maryland. But thank you. But my background is geography and GIS, and so I'm seeing all my friends doing that kind of work. But I just was curious. I mean, I know why I'm choosing the combination there, but I was curious to hear why you all did. So that's my background.
Well, so yeah, and that, I guess the reason I asked is because I've had that conversation a few times with folks, and I think to really love to be a really good lawyer, you sort of have to love the law in a way. I mean, you have to. I think you do have to enjoy it. You can go to law school to get a degree and then go on to do other work. That's not not being a lawyer, not practicing law, obviously. But if you really have you really want to do environmental law as a lawyer and actually practice the law, you sort of have to be a little crazy, I think, because you have to sort of love that that minutia and that animal retentiveness that will drive everybody around you crazy. And I certainly in our work in the agency, we have to play that role. It's our obligation to our client programs at EPA to pore over the details, and to point out the little things that nobody wants to think about, and to raise issues that are complex and difficult, and driving me crazy, Dan. Just give me the answer. You know, so I think really to continue in law to be really successful at it, you sort of have to learn to love that aspect of it.
Okay. And another question. Actually, we're going to go to this one.
Thank you. I was wondering, I know, Stephanie, you touched on it a little bit, but I was wondering if there was any project or case that you worked on that kind of stands out in your mind, and if maybe you could talk a little bit about your role that you took in that project or case.
And so the question is, for those on the phone, what role did you take in a project or case that kind of stood out?
Well, I was trying to think, up to the cases that really stand out in my mind have not necessarily been environmentally related. We tried a case in Maryland. It was a product liability matter, and we got a defense verdict, which was a big deal, out in Montgomery County, and that was the one case that really stands out to me. But in sort of the cases that I work on now, winning a summary judgment motion, we just won one in a case, and I helped to draft most of the briefing on it. So the type of work we do is not the sexiest stuff in the world, but or when you take a great deposition and you leave there, you think, I got that guy to say exactly what I wanted to say. The record's going to look great, and you look back and it looks good. That's always a good thing. So that's kind of the nature of my practice.
I can think of a couple of examples. When I first came to EPA, going back to the idea of like grabbing on opportunities, it just happened that the woman who had been doing a lot of the brownfields legal counsel was going on maternity leave, and and this is another aspect of government practice, that you may have heard before, but like things you can get a lot of responsibility really fast, and in this case it was basically the brownfields person was gone. She had like 3 weeks. She's like, okay, this is everything you need to know about brownfields. Now you can counsel the program while I'm on maternity leave for 6 months. And so that was interesting. And I mean, it was, the first couple of, actually, I guess just to quickly summarize some of the substance. What brownfields means at EPA is it's basically a grant program. I mean, we do a number of things with brownfields, but the big program is sort of a grants program where we provide funding to municipalities and local groups and stuff to actually assess brownfield sites, and then we also fund cleanups of those sites. And one of the interesting things about the brownfields law that Congress put in there back in 2002 was it made very clear that liable parties should not be able, under the Superfund law, should not be able to get grant money, which makes it very interesting because that means for all of our grant applicants, part of that grant application has to be a somewhat circumscribed, but nonetheless sufficient liability analysis that we're comfortable that when we give money to these people, we're not giving money to liable parties on CERCLA. So that means our office assists the program in getting, we get this grant application, okay, and it's tough because the program will naturally wants to do what it's set up to do, which is to get that money out there and to get these sites cleaned up and to get them assessed. And then our role as attorneys is to sort of protect the integrity of the enforcement program and to protect the integrity of the statute. So there's some tension there that comes with playing that role, and that there's a couple of cases where we've had a situation where we wanted to get to the right result, and that required a lot of legal work between the headquarters offices, the regional office, and the Department of Justice, because there was a litigation. Thinking of one case in particular where there was litigation in state court and federal court. There was like a cadre of DOJ lawyers involved, a cadre of EPA lawyers involved at different offices, and it was in this case it was actually fulfilling to sort of play a role in coming to a solution that worked for everybody. So that's kind of, maybe, I mean, I can't, obviously can't go into too much detail about it, but it's an example where litigation meshes with policy, meshes with in-house counseling in an odd way, and ultimately everybody hopes to get to the result that's beneficial to everybody, but it can become a very, very complex process very quickly.
Hi. So for somebody who doesn't want to be, I think, Daniel, as you said, an actual lawyer, somebody who doesn't want to really do litigation but is interested in working in environmental policy, have you seen that there are benefits of having a JD or that having a JD opens certain doors that having either a master's or a PhD wouldn't grant you?
I guess some people bristle at not being actual lawyers simply because in the legislative
in
the legislative context, when you're drafting legislation, interpreting it, you're very good at executing legal skills in a way that most lawyers never ever have to. We're helping maybe develop future statute you'll be bound to, but it's just a whole different set of skills. But I think that one of the reasons why after getting an MA I didn't go and get a PhD, because a lot of people would have thought that would be the logical next step, is that I feel like a JD could do everything a PhD can do, but a PhD can't do everything a JD can do. Like I can teach, at a college, and I can consult, and but I could also, if I wanted to be a real lawyer, I could be one. And you know what I mean? I just feel like there's more options. Whereas if I'll just be frank, there's not any one thing I want to know that much about to get a PhD. I mean, there's just not. Come on, I can dedicate 4 years of my life to this one thing. So that's why I thought, again, I always wanted to be an attorney, but I also saw that once I could put in my MA program, it just made more sense to continue with my original dream for being 7 years old to get the JD versus the PhD. But I also think if you want to remain in DC, it's just like, a price of entry into almost anywhere to have a JD is just me. Like, everywhere you go, people tend to have it, and I've never heard anyone regret having it. They might not use it the way they intended, but they never thought it took away from opportunity.
And what about the idea of having on the JD and then not sitting for the bar? How would that fit in? Like,
I didn't do that.
Do you think?
I would definitely take the bar.
Definitely take the bar. Yeah. It's so funny. This very senior lobbyist at a big shop in DC, he spent most of his post-legal law school career either being a chief of staff or a legislative director on the Hill, and ultimately the head of a caucus, and now he's off the Hill. But everyone's like, you get out of law school, you get your bar admission, then you do whatever else you want to do, but no one can take that away from you. And you never know where you might want to end up.
Do you think that you would be disadvantaged looking for jobs, like policy jobs, if you have a JD but not a bar exam?
No, probably not. Because, there are a handful of people out there like that, but to me, I just feel like this is as much law as you're ever going to know, so don't put it off till later.
Okay.
This 2 months after law school
Yeah,
is the most law you're ever going to know.
Will keep your doors open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it won't get easier to take the exam
Right.
later. It's a general exam, so
People are like, Bill of Rights, what? Wherever they're doing, they're just doing that one part of law.
Sorry, this is just a follow-up question. Does it make a big difference where you take the bar if you're planning on doing this sort of national work at the EPA? Or I'm just curious, what state you took the bar in, or.
I think the answer is probably yes, it can matter. I'm actually probably not the best example because my girlfriend, now wife, was living in Texas when I went to law school, so I just went there and took the Texas bar without really thinking about it, and happened to learn oil and gas law because that's on the Texas bar, so that was actually helpful. And then if you practice in DC, if you practice for the federal government, I believe the rule is you can be barred in any state. And I think it can matter. But for my practice, having taken the bar randomly in Texas was just fine. But for other people, probably not.
DC is a great place where you can waive in from almost any other jurisdiction. So I looked at it. I'm coming to DC. I need to waive it eventually. So, what's my sort of second plan? Where might I go if I wasn't in D.C.? And sort of look at it that way to say, I grew up in Michigan, my family's there. If I left D.C., I would probably go to Michigan. So that's the bar I took. It wasn't, better or worse career-wise as far as what I'm learning, but it's sort of what sort of has set me up for the future to make life maybe easier 10 years, 20 years down the road if I want to go back for some reason. So
I had a professor that was a federal agency attorney. I can't remember the agency, but he just said take the easiest bar you can find. If your goal really is to be a government attorney, it really wouldn't matter which bar it is. You just have to be barred in the United States.
Hopefully there's a commentary on the quality of government lawyers.
Like, don't agonize over it if that's truly what you want.
But, so a lot of practice happens in think about personal matters are relevant. There are states where a particularly large amount of environmental litigation takes place. California's a big one. DC, obviously. New York. So I think there's those kind of factors. Where do you want to end up?
Just a comment and a question. A comment on the professional engineering licensing is similar to law licensing, and as far as I know that there are reciprocity. So any state that you take the bar exam and become a lawyer, by reciprocity, you can get it in any state. Now, I'm an engineer, and as a licensed engineer, whatever state you're living in or working in, you take it first, unless you think that exams are similar in case of engineering, the licensing. So even though it's offered by the state, but they've kind of uniform it all throughout the country, the same exam is given for getting license. So I would think that in law practice, it should be similar, and then you could pretty much develop your own capabilities wherever you're working. My question is, I was hoping, although the discussion that is going on is very useful for the younger people who are about to enter their profession and so on, I was hoping we'd find out a little more about Environmental Law Institute and what it does, and what do you think is the state of affairs with environmental protection vis-a-vis law in this country? Because, a lot of laws get stuck, and now with the elections coming, I'm sure a number of, legislations are stuck somewhere because nobody wants to touch it, neither Democrats nor the Republicans. Everybody is afraid that they'll be accused of doing this or putting this. This is a tax, they'll say, oh, you put this environmental requirement. You're the one responsible for this additional tax or additional on the industry, because the Republicans are arguing that these regulations are really causing problem in this country, and our business is not growing. So given that, that's what I was hoping I would also hear from Environmental Law Institute, because that's something of interest to me. And I just wanted to put in that my background as an engineer, when I went into environmental planning, we had to take two environmental law 1 and 2, and I've always found it funny that very similar situation, the judges in different courts give a different verdict. And that has been my problem with environmental law. Gee, it doesn't come like a science, where you have factor A, B, C, and this is the answer. That doesn't happen in environmental law.
So actually, I'm going to let Monty respond to the bar reciprocity part.
Yeah, just real quick, and I think most of you probably know, I think in some cases it is, you can take a bar one place and you can get reciprocity, but you have to be careful about the state. I know California doesn't allow for reciprocity. You got to take that exam. I don't care how many years you've been out. I'm barred in South Carolina. I think it's the same way. Other states, if you've been practicing for a certain number of years, you can take a specialty attorney's exam. So you've got to just be careful about that. But I assume most of you kind of know that, or you'll soon find out.
And as to your question, I'm happy to talk with you more about ELI. The first thing I'll say is that we are a nonpartisan, non-governmental organization, so we don't really have a whole lot to say about what's happening on the Hill.
actually. And then the second thing I'll say is that this is actually, it is focused on careers. So I think that's probably a conversation that I'd really like to have with you afterwards, if that's okay. There's a lot of information on our website. It's sometimes difficult to find, but you can start with the About ELI and then go from there. We are not necessarily a neutral broker. We want the environment to do better, but we're an honest broker. We try to fill that space between law and science, as Dan was mentioning earlier with all the research projects. And then the other thing that I'd say is that we also really like to bring people together. We see one of our roles as being that of a facilitator, which is why on all of our panels I try to have somebody from every aspect, and unfortunately my industry person fell through. So to those of you who are interested in learning a little bit more about corporations and industry, I apologize for not being able to put somebody on the panel from there. But so I'm happy to speak with you a little bit more afterwards.
I would throw something onto that, which is that, you know, the transactional law that and opportunities associated with that, with renewable energy mandates, and I think there's one of the things that was impressed upon me when I was at Vermont by some very good professors is a lot of the result. If you want to get results, a lot of that happens in the transactional context, working with businesses, working with stakeholders, and I do regulation. It sounds like we have a litigator, we have a policy person, and litigation or regulatory compliance. Yeah. But doing deals, transactional work is a whole other area of law that you probably wouldn't do a whole lot of environmental law. You would do a lot of contracts and corporate and that sort of thing. But that's actually where I think nowadays, just to allude to the current situation, that's where a lot of work is happening.
And it was.
I would say too, I think it's a harder area to learn about in law school. I think there's no moot court, there's no clinics, that kind of stuff. So I think if you're interested, you should definitely, I think, focus on seeking that out. If you can do it in a summer job, that's great, or something like that. But I was not exposed to it. I wish it would have been a little more at times, but seek it out.
I think the other part of that I would mention, just from being a membership organization, from what I've seen, is that there are a lot of people who practice environmental law who don't consider themselves environmental lawyers. So you think about the real estate people, you think about other areas of law that aren't kind of focused on the major domestic environmental legislation or even the international legislation, international treaties. And they actually touch upon environmental law quite a bit. And so there is a lot of crossover from other areas of law that it's hard to find either an environmental law course in law school that, as you were saying, keep your eye open for, because it does open a whole new world of job possibilities and career paths that you might not have thought of.
Could you guys just clarify what corporate, like what the doing deals, like what you're talking about, like corporate law?
Corporate practice, yeah, or even financial security. Your law school may have like a secured transactions course, corporate law.
And then in the real world, what would that translate to? Like being a corporate lawyer with like a sustainability, like CSR part?
Sure, I mean that could be part of it.
Maybe financing renewable energy programs. If you want to build a wind farm, you've got to pay for that somehow. Someone's got to do all that contract work. As an example, a lot more of that kind of thing is going on now with firms and people specializing. I think even in environmental or energy type areas where you could do more. It's not just generic deal work. It's really focused on environmental type issues.
But you need those tax credits for most of those things to happen.
Tax
So
law,
that's where
take your
our
income
people
tax
come
law.
in. Without them, you don't have a project.
For example, to clean up a brownfield site, what do you need? Financing is where it's at. You need, EPA runs a lot of what EPA. EPA is a regulatory agency, but we also run a lot of huge grant programs, and that means, we have in my office we have the media-centric law offices. Like I do the waste stuff. We have a water law office. We have an air law office. We have a pesticides and toxics law office. I can't say much more about that other than it's incredibly complicated, and I'm really glad we have people who know how it works. and if you wanted to get into transactional and finance law, I think that's always where expertise is needed, especially in the environmental field where you have a lot of people who want to do good work and aren't necessarily bankers.
So a little bit shifting into the nitty-gritty. Danny, you mentioned jobs at the EPA. We have a question from a listener on the phone, attendee on the phone, who's a graduating third-year law student and is wondering about USA jobs. They don't seem to have any jobs posted for EPA, and wondering if they're posted there, if they have any kind of, is that the right place to be going? Do you happen to know?
Speaking entirely in my personal capacity, I've always hated USA jobs. I've never been able to figure out how to use it, and frankly, that's not how I got my job. It was posted I don't know the different processes they have, but it wasn't through USA jobs. So I don't know if other people have had experience with that. I don't want to totally,
I think that they're posted at USA jobs. That's my recollection.
Yeah, well, some things are posted there. I don't want to speak for Paul. I'm not sure how they do it, but I've always found just to be in solidarity with you if you're looking on USA jobs, it's a difficult process to navigate.
Okay. Yes.
So when we are talking about environmental issues, we should think in medium and long term. So in your point of view, so in your opinion, on environmental, what are the main points on environmental law for the next 10 and 20 years? So the next week we will start the Rio Plus 20 in Brazil. So we are working on air matters, water, solid waste, payment for ecosystem service, climate change. So what you can tell us about what we are seeing for the next 10, 20 years? So is there something new that's coming up? So what's the matter that you should specialize on? So because when I talk with my students about this, so we usually think about what are the main points. And it's difficult to think about this. So I would like to listen to you.
We have an international office. I'm not part of that team. But no, just quite frankly, I think you bring up a really good point because I feel that unfortunately a lot of, at least policy, political stakeholders, they're not thinking in even week increments, let alone years. And that's why we see, regardless of party, I think the American people, based on polling, don't feel like there's a lot of movement, not just on environmental matters, but maybe a host of matters. But I definitely think that we don't necessarily have a lot of people who are well-versed in environmental matters prior to maybe becoming stakeholders via elected officials. And once they get in office, I don't think they're getting an opportunity to get up to speed because many people are just engulfed in kind of minute-by-minute political points, not really long-term. It's kind of, I guess, to me, what one used to call a statesman or stateswoman, depending on how you look at it. You're supposed to be looking kind of long-range for your constituents, but I'm sensing that's a bygone era, and I know that, at least for Earth Justice, we were encouraging a greater U.S. presence at the Rio. Is it plus 20? Make sure I pronounce it correctly. But as we know, there are so many competing interests for time with the president and his leadership team. It's hard for them, I guess, to balance all those competing needs. But to me, it really doesn't matter who's in office or what party they're aligned with. The American people have to find ways to direct their representatives in a way that is less apathetic because they really won't respond to you not calling them, not writing them, and they really do respond to that. And I think that the frustration of the American people has prevented them from letting their voice be heard. Thus, it kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're not going to care because they're not hearing about it. You know what I mean? Just the cycle continues. So part of the struggle for my job is to not only have my clients care, but to motivate just average citizens to tell their members in Congress to care. But I'm just talking from a political frame because what you're talking about is almost solely political. I don't know how much your litigation is going to get the president. Attend that or his deputies.
side of that is you're going to see a lot more of this change happening through the agencies and not necessarily through the political process itself. I mean, look at the last 4 or 5 years on climate change. Nothing has gone through Congress, but EPA has been really making a lot of changes. So I mean, it's the current laws. How can you repurpose what's out there to meet the new challenges? I think that's where you're going to be seeing a lot of innovation and changes. So.
And also not just new challenges. I just want to point out a lot of things that are happening in the agency were things that they were asked to do when I was in 4th grade. So they're just getting around to implementing them, but they're not new calls. They're old calls.
Yeah, I would have thought, I mean, a couple of years ago, I think the way a lot of folks might have answered that question is cap and trade is going to be the future, and I don't know, that's not necessarily where we're at anymore, at least for the time being. I'm not going to make political predictions, but I think a lot of organizations are sort of gearing up for that, and that's sort of on the back burner for a while at least. So.
Okay. So a question specifically for Dan, speaking about brownfields, is do you get to visit the sites, and what are your hours like, and are you often on call?
I wish I got to visit the sites. Unfortunately, again, going back to like the role that my office plays, our regional offices really do the site-specific work, and so folks who are interested in more of that on-the-ground experience, I would say, like in government, the regional offices are where you should be looking for the state agencies. Sometimes we get the opportunity to visit a site, and that's kind of a treat, and it's a great experience. Unfortunately, I have to often work a lot through my program clients who can give me the necessary factual information to when we need to make legal calls, and unfortunately with the budget also, we can't travel a lot anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, what was the other question? Oh, being on call. It's interesting. The Emergency Response Law Office does, that. So we actually have like a command center in the basement of the EPA headquarters, which is like really cool. There's like big banks. It's like NASA like command centers. So when there's like national incidents, stuff gets run out of there, and it's during the before I came to EPA, but during the BP spill, we actually did have had lawyers. I mean, we actually had staffing down there running kind of quick legal troubleshooting for media inquiries, and I don't know, we want to do this kind of thing. Is that legal? So maybe. So I don't know exactly how that happened. I'm just kind of making it up. But our office would be involved in that. When that kind of national level emergency happens. For most things, I think it really does happen at the regional level, though.
Okay. And could you say a little bit more about the relationship between the regions and headquarters?
Sure. Well, just to keep it focused on careers, I think, Justice Department are the litigators for the government. They're the ones that go into court, and the Attorney General controls litigation of the United States. So if you want to do government, and you're interested in litigation, the Justice Department would be the place to go look. If you are more interested in getting into the weeds of how our regulatory programs run, like for my job, I advise the program that actually writes the RCRA regulations and develops guidance documents and that sort of thing. So that my role would be to help our policymakers in just taking RCRA for example, those folks who are writing our waste regulations and help them to craft craft rules and craft policies that both accomplish their policy objectives and are also legally defensible. So that's a good part of the work that we do. And then if you were to go to the regional offices, the regions will often be involved in helping craft national policies and national rules. We'll put together a work group around, if we're writing a rule, there's a whole process within the agency for how we write a rule. It's called the Action Development Process, the ADP, and that really governs each step of the way by which the agency goes from having a concept of wouldn't it be a good idea if we did this to actually putting out a proposed rule and then putting out a final rule. And to do that, usually a work group would be constituted within the agency and including other agencies and stakeholders, depending on the context, and the regional offices would help with that. So then what the lawyer would be doing is becoming an absolute master of that rule because when that rule goes final, oftentimes with the work that EPA does, we get sued. And from either side, if you get sued by both sides, you've done something right. Sort of our approach. So then you become in a way you're sort of the expert for justice, because they're the lawyers who are going to be defending that rule in court. They're going to look to you as the in-house counsel at EPA to be able to kind of be second chair in the courtroom. And so that's where you would be the one that knows the record better than the litigator. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but I'm offering all this because I know when I went, I had almost no idea what happened, how government works, how it's structured, who does what. It's complicated, and so I think it's helpful to think about if you're going into government work, there's a lot of different roles that lawyers play.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. Anybody have questions?
Thanks. I'm not a law student and probably will never be a law student. I'm actually a master's student, and I'm here because I'm actually working on renewable energy projects over the summer. And so I'm tackling issues of siting and right-of-way and environmental impact statements and the like. And I guess why I'm really interested in all of this is I sort of want to know from a layperson's standpoint, where are the blind spots in environmental law? So you're counseling various individuals on all these issues, and they say, oh, I had no idea. I also had to be thinking about that. I guess this really gives you an opportunity to vent. Where are people misunderstanding environmental law, and what's your best advice for somebody coming into that from the outside?
So the question is, from a layperson's perspective, a non-lawyer, what is it that people miss? How are people misunderstanding environmental law kind of in a transactional situation setting? Anybody?
I'm not sure I've been doing this long enough to really have a good perspective on it. In some of the areas, the wetland stuff is obviously a big one where people can't believe this is a wetland, or I can't believe I had to get a permit for that. It's really, the best advice is if you're doing a big transaction, spend the money up front to hire the lawyer to tell you. That's really all I can say is that it will cost more at the end of the day if you don't. And I have a area where I practice. These folks that do transactional work have their checklist, I'm sure, of all the things you need to go through to say what are the crazy laws that might apply to this kind of work. So you probably need the transactional person here to talk about that. Actually, maybe that's in addition to the panel sometime.
I hate to be cynical, but I'm not always convinced that it's a lack of understanding. It's a hoping I won't get caught, or I understand it so well that I'm hoping that I can prevent myself from ever having to comply with this. At least from our standpoint, with our practice, most of the things that we've been litigating for a very long time. And we're dealing with very sophisticated industries and often very old industries, and it's not often been a lack of understanding environmental law. It's not wanting to be affected by.
Then turning that around a little bit, where are the areas not of ignorance but then of evasion?
Well, I think, quite frankly, with I work, on clean air issues specifically. The Clean Air Act is going into its 41st year as well. I think that when we're talking not even about climate change, I work on conventional pollution, like old school soot, mercury, the things that we term them charismatic mega pollutants. Everyone understands it. They don't need to be a scientist. They don't need to have taken chemistry. They're just like, I don't want any parts of that lead, mercury, and soot. And so the fact that everyone knows that these things are harmful, and that a lot of the technologies needed to reduce it were created when, our grandparents were in World War II. We're talking about old school things to clean up old school things. So when someone has been aware over 20 years that they would have to reduce that and they haven't taken the time to do it, I don't don't think that's a lack of savvy or expertise. It's just I don't want to, and I'm hoping to wait out the governmental pressures that will require me to do so. I mean, if I was, I think it's exciting sometimes to defend people I don't agree with. So if I were their attorney, I'd be like, I mean, you know, delay is victory. Every day I'm not having to comply with this standard, I am a good lawyer for you. That's how I look at it.
You want to comply with the law now.
We have to understand that you don't have to comply with it if you have, I mean, because corporate lobby teams at law firms, they're attorneys, and their job is to work with Congress to create a whole set of mechanisms that prevent you from actually having to comply with things. So if I can convince people in Congress to create some type of delay of implementation, you know, bill, that's victory. It buys you more time. I'd rather you pay me than buy a scrubber. If I'm your attorney. And I think, you know, if I was their attorney, that's how I would attorney. I think that's how some people look at it. Maybe cynical.
No, not. I think, you know, maybe an entirely different kind of issue that we deal with our programs is, and going back to the question of what is environmental law? Environmental law, in large part, is administrative. And you need to take, you know, you've probably heard it before, but you know, administrative law should be your foundational course going into further environmental practice, and or at least regulatory practice. Before I went to law school, actually, my friend's dad was a lawyer in the Twin Cities, and I actually went and sat in one of his. He taught an admin law class, and I went and sat in one night, and it still sticks with me. He said he told his class, administrative law is one word, reasonableness, and that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's still I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, because what is reasonable depends on the record of support you have in administrative law. So when the agency gets sued, or when we're advising our clients, we're continuously, you know, as a lawyer, we say that we can help you as much as you can, but the record is your responsibility. And when you do something as an agency, it needs to be reasonable. That means, you know, there's a whole body of law under the Administrative Procedure Act and the various environmental statutes on what that means in a given context. But what it comes down to more often than not is, what's your record for this decision, and helping the client understand that, and understanding that body of law, and what, you know, what's a relevant factor that you need to be considering in your decision making. And if you haven't considered that, or if you haven't properly responded to a public comment raising that point, here are your risks.
And in the back.
Thank you. I'm interested in doing law, but part of the reason I've been put off by it has been these tragic stories I've been hearing about people not getting employed after getting their JD. I know that the field of environmental law has been growing a lot. Part of my attention, because I'm genuinely interested in the field, but I want to know, how do you see the market now, and where do you see it in the next 5 years?
So the question is, how do you see the job market now for environmental lawyers, and where do you see it going? And is that specific to litigation or policy?
In general.
Okay.
Please.
Seems like litigation has been difficult, at least kind of what I've seen right now. The enforcement actions have slowed down quite a bit. There's more work on the regulatory side, but you know, the big cases, the bet the company kind of cases, I think have just not been coming up as much. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit tougher field than maybe it was 10 years ago. I think there's more of that going on. It's a field that's really dependent in a lot of ways on what the government is doing. So it's not, you know, private commercial, you know, litigation where it's as long as two companies want to fight it out, that you can go ahead and do that. You're really waiting on the government to take the lead on what happens. So in that sense, it's kind of tough to say. Who knows what's going to, you know, this election cycle can really change what happens. It may not. Who knows? But you know, 5 years is tough to say. I think in the field changes. What we were doing probably 5 years ago is different than what we're doing now, and that's where the business is. So.
I mean, if you're wealthy and you got $120,000 to spend, that's one thing. But yeah, you have to pay back your student loans, and I enjoy. I've always wanted to be in private practice. That's what I've always kind of envisioned myself doing, and it gives me flexibility to do everything. When I clerked, for example, I couldn't get money for political campaigns, etc. I can support candidates in private practice, those things. But you know, it helps to be able to pay your bills. You know, Joe was mentioning. It's tough to predict 5 years from now. You know, companies, particularly in a recession, and as we've moved out of the recession, have tightened their belts in many cases just to be able to do it. I mean, the balance of power was more on the side of the firms, you know, certainly 10 years ago, and that has kind of shifted a little bit. It was funny, 10, 15 years ago, I've got an uncle who's a partner in a large firm in the South, and whenever the New York offices, I think went above $100,000 for associates. This is 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember the exact number. He just flipped out. I mean, he just couldn't believe what in the world's going on. Of course, rates increased as well. So you don't have that now. And I'd gamble to say you're not going to see that kind of growth in the legal field in the next 5 years. I'm going to take a gamble. But, so I'd say be careful and
it's worth pursuing it to a point where you can take the LSAT, you can do the application process and kind of make that decision. You know, that's not a huge investment, it's some time and it's some money, but you know, where you can get into school, what your options are, I think that can shape. If you can get into a top 5 school, I think you're probably in pretty good shape to get a job out of law school and do well. You know, so it's a question of where are you on that spectrum, and really think hard once you know where you're going to be.
I just want to plug for nonprofits. I was kind of surprised because I came from working for state governments, working around housing issues, housing nonprofits. I believe that of all progressive movements I've seen, that the environmental movement is one of the most well-financed and well-funded. I mean, it just appears that way, even when you see what folks are getting paid at, you know, some organizations. It's really, you know, not different from working as a government attorney in some cases. It's just depending on the organization you're hooked up with. So I don't want you to think necessarily you're getting paid a pittance, you know, simply because you choose not to work for a firm. I mean, quite frankly, I'm getting paid way more off the Hill to work for a nonprofit, not work for a for-profit, than I did on the Hill. So it's you know, it's all to me about living within your means and just really being, like you said, deliberate about your life plan, because you'll be amazed how comfortable life you can have if you just plan it out. Because I wouldn't bank on the $160,000, and the folks I know who did, they got deferred, or ultimately the firm either disappeared like Dewey, or Powery. You know, I mean, I know people at these places, or a lot of people are just laid off that were the most recent, you know, hires. So
I think there was a time whenever, particularly liberal arts majors, and you didn't really know what you wanted to do, just went to law school, and that's nothing. I wouldn't advise that for anybody. But it didn't sound like that's you or any of you all here. I mean, it sounds like you've got specific interest and stuff. I don't want to discourage you from going to law school. No. I felt bad as Joel answered that question. Like, Joe, I'm glad you came back and answered that. I said, no, it's a great education, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. But there are real costs now and real things to think about that I didn't necessarily have to think about when I was applying to law school.
Yeah, actually, no, I was thinking the same thing, actually. I have a friend who went to school who quit, right after law school had a business plan to start like a farmer's legal aid kind of clinic, where he was providing legal services to small farmers up in Vermont on agriculture issues and even just like general practice issues to help these farmers who were he supported. They were doing good work, running organic farms, whatever, and they need legal help just like anybody else does. He's actually turned that into a pretty good business, and he just did it himself. yourself out of law school. So if you have business, particularly if you have business experience, I think, if you can't find a job, you can always make a job.
And lots of people are doing better than the people who aren't doing good.
Can you say just a minute about the role of consultants in the book government? Like, who are these people that we're talking about? What do they do?
Well, we use consultants. For example, we're a small organization. We only have about 250 people, most of them attorneys across 9 offices. And as we all know, it's a very monastic endeavor. You're busy writing motions and writing briefs and so forth. So we don't necessarily have time to scour the country for impacted citizens that aren't our clients, for example. So we might have a consultant that is nationally recognized for doing environmental organizing. They already have an existing network that we can tap into, and they can help us turn people out at EPA hearings, or get people to be to provide testimony and so forth.
So that's how you do it.
But it's just one of the ways, especially for us not having a grassroots structure of zero harm.
Yeah.
That's where consulting can help, and they could also help in terms of just helping us even draft public comment from the perspective of the impact of citizen. Or we're always going to do our legal stuff, but we always like to supplement it with the voices of impacted folks. So I mean, there are a lot of people who paid their dues doing organizing, and now they're able to help not only NGOs but also help EPA and the EJ office actually identify people that might be impacted by some of the rulemaking you're developing.
Yeah. And EPA does a ton of work with contractors.
Yeah.
And a lot of that. So I can't speak to if you were to practice law in that capacity. I think consultancy probably maybe a little out of my field here, but I just feel like that a consultant will bring something to the table beyond just the water, rather than just hiring a lawyer. But when I was at ELI here, we did some projects. I recall we brought in some economists for our energy subsidies work, and it was obviously in DC consultants.
GIS.
And
So we've kind of heard from government agencies, nonprofits, and from some private practice, but I'm actually wondering what you guys see the role of academia in the future of environmental law and policy. Because on the one hand, academics are individuals who contribute to the intellectual marketplace, but they also train the kind of next generation of attorneys and policymakers. Do you see the job market opening up for people who are interested in academia? And how do you see kind of those people contributing to contemporary and future law and policy?
Are you referring specifically to legal academia, like law professors?
Sure, and I had some of my best undergraduate professors had JDs. They were lawyers by training and then went into academia. One of them never actually practiced. She was a JD, and then I guess at some point decided that she hated law, or I don't know, just decided that being a lawyer wasn't for her, and then immediately went from her JD to teaching undergraduate, and she was probably one of my top 3 favorite professors during my undergraduate education. So either or.
Well, I think there's always going to be a place for academics. I'm just thinking about my own private practice, and when you're researching, let's say you're writing a briefing and you're doing research, and the first place I'll often go is a treatise or some law review article, often written by an academic, and they're talking about something broader, and I always go to their sites, and then you can really find what law there. So there's going to always be that. I think too, you're seeing a number of law schools, sort of newer law schools that are coming about over the last 10 years. I can think of a few off the top, and so I can't answer that specifically. I won't say, but certainly I think there'll be a place for those who want to get into academics and get into the academy and to write and think about environmental stuff. Of course, if you do that and if you're going to law school, you want to do very well. It certainly helps to come from the top 5 law school in many respects. So those are things you'll want to think about. Or you spend a number of years in private practice or at EPA, and then you've got a real subject matter expertise, and then you can go and teach. So I'm sure that certainly is a future.
You talk about writing is I think the biggest thing if you want to go into academia is just be thinking about that from day one when you're in law school.
Absolutely.
Certainly early on in practice, you can have opportunities to write. It can be, I think, daunting to think, oh, I need to write some, earth-shattering thing. But I mean, you read a lot of things that are just well written. They explain what the law is. It's not anything new even, but it's very helpful. Things that you, as a practitioner, to say. You can pick it up and it helps you, saves you hours of work. Someone else have thought about that already. So I think that role will always be there.
We actually write author our own reports, and sometimes you might have to contract out some technical analysis, but we oftentimes partner with academics that they're not usually legal academics. They might be hard science or some mixture of sociology or so forth, and it helps to drive kind of agenda setting. For example, on the Hill, people might think something is kind of benign, but if there's research developed that shows that certain type of sources are almost disproportionately cited near poor people or near communities of color, it might get members of Congress who have thought of something as benign to recognize, wow, it almost seems to be cited in a predatory manner in this polluting type of facility. And oftentimes, groups like ours have to find academics who are already working on that to kind of just get people interested in something, because just us talking about it isn't enough. And sometimes even with our litigation, if we know we want to create momentum behind litigation, it can't hurt to release reports that show some type of pollution phenomenon and how it's impacting people, because the everyday person really doesn't care about Chevron versus whatever. They just don't care. All they care about is that there's hexavalent chromium in my water. I don't want any parts of that. And if we can have kind of academics getting people concerned about things and getting the media to write about that, it does sometimes help us both on the Hill and help to signal to the agency, you might not want us to sue. People care about this. How much we just do the right thing? Or we have to like that. So we love academics. They're more neutral, I think.
Yeah, I think multidisciplinary work is has been and will continue to be a growth field. And that involves bringing in academics.
Any final questions in the room?
So I guess this kind of goes back more to all of your backgrounds. And several of you mentioned having clerked. And I was wondering how much you think that has helped you in developing your career, either through pointed like interviewers asking about it, or more so from just the skills that you learned from the experience.
So the question is, how has clerking helped you in your careers?
It's a fantastic experience for me. I mean, if you get a chance to clerk, I think for any other course, but certainly federal level, take it, run with it. I mean, the opportunity to interact with a judge, and these federal judges have a lot of power. I mean, these are, and they can influence a lot. And so working back and forth, talking to my judge, and then certainly drafting orders and having to really think like a judge from day one out of law school. I don't know if there are many better jobs out there.
I think on the litigation side, I think law school trains you well to be an appellate lawyer.
Absolutely.
It does not train you well to be a litigator in the same way.
You can get a reference for the next better job too.
Oh, absolutely. And your judge will come to your wedding, and it becomes your lifelong mentor and friend. And all that.
Is that guaranteed then?
Yeah, it depends, yeah. But no, it was a fantastic experience.
The day-to-day work, just drafting an order, things you don't think about that in law school too much, but it's a pretty critical thing. That you walk into court, want something, you better be able to hand that judge that piece of paper to say, this gives me what I want. Those are things that you learn, how to navigate a courtroom, how to work with a judge's office. That it's a great experience.
And oftentimes at a large firm, you'll start out and you'll do a lot of work that you didn't necessarily think you won't even do appellate, so you do a lot of document work or whatever it is, and spend a year, 2 years really doing heavy-minded sort of legal work. It's just fantastic.
I totally agree with that. I didn't clerk for a judge. I think if you can get it, you should get it. You should take it. what some of the regional offices do. I know other agencies have honors programs that you can get into right out of law school. You know, you might want to, you know, the predicate oftentimes for, you know, you certainly help yourself into the summer associate, your 2L year, and going to your 3L year. You know, if you can bag an internship with the agency, like in OGC, we have a summer honors program. Oftentimes, somebody who is in that program will then be selected as a you know, as a first year as a first year out of school, and from there, you know, possibly you know, taking that into a full-time position. So there are definitely a lot of great programs that government and environmental organizations, can't speak to the private sector, I know, but you know, other organizations do too. For all you folks out there who don't bag a clerkship.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time, so time for the reception to start. There are drinks and snacks outside. You're welcome to filter back in here. Thank you to all of my panelists. I really appreciate it. And just a final note for the audience, please fill out a survey. It'll be emailed to you shortly. It'd be helpful so that we can do this better next time. And then also, if you have any ideas of seminars or things that you'd like to learn more about, and this goes for panelists as well, please email me. My email address is middleton@eli.org. So thank you everyone for joining.